Hello, hello. This is Celeste. I'm here on the Sales Edge podcast with Alex. We met on LinkedIn,
Yes, we did.
where you meet everybody in a business professional setting these days. And I'm so excited he agreed to come on the podcast to give a little insight into his world. We were chatting earlier, and I will let him introduce himself, but I'm just going to preface this and say, it is not sexy, but it is absolutely needed. The industry that he's in, and we're going to chat about what's unique about his sales story and his sales edge. So Alex from Raleigh, not Raleigh Durham, Raleigh.
Yes.
Take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, I am Alex Christian. I'm an account executive, like you said, based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I am happily married to one of the best women in the world and a dog dad to an absurdly energetic little border collie. Like you kind of mentioned, I come from a very non-traditional sales background. That's actually how we connected. So I grew up in a sales family. Both my parents were in sales, so I swore up, down, and sideways I would never get into sales. Mom, dad, that's not cool. I want to do something exciting. Grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, which is UPS's world hub. So everybody's parents flew for UPS. And the really cool dads were the guys who would pull out VHS tapes of their time in the Gulf War, and you'd see some real life Top Gun videos, and the aviation bug hit me hard. So I went to school for aviation. I'm actually a corporate pilot still, but as a commercial pilot, you are just a glorified bus driver of the sky. And so I was down in Tampa flying these little charter flights to the Keys every day. And my wife was back in Raleigh, and I was miserable. And so I said, well, what can I do as a career that I can take what I've enjoyed and transfer those skills? And so I sat down and I said, what I really love is I love solving complex problems and I love connecting with people. Oh no, that's sales. So I started looking around, shopping my resume out. I had a buddy who was in ERP sales, working for Oracle and NetSuite. And so I was like, all right, this sounds feasible. And I shot my resume out. I started with a local company here in Raleigh. They're an SAP bolt-on shop. So they tie into SAP and Oracle and JD Edwards, all of these really boring financial CMMS suites and ERPs, maintenance and financial tracking. And they help companies tackle maintenance planning and scheduling and health and safety permitting. And so I had to learn all of that from scratch. I knew nothing about oil and gas or mining and metals. And ERP and CMMS was alphabet soup to me, and learned that world very quickly. A master data company was then acquired. And when you said you're stealing my words here, it is not sexy, because it's talking about how individual data records are stored in these systems, and how do we standardize them and keep them clean. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years. I'm currently in the middle of a transition. I'm actually getting back to some of my roots, which by the time this goes live, I'll have shared more about, but staying in that inventory management and scheduling space, but with my own personal spin on that. So looking forward to the transition coming up.
Something that I think it's really important is highlighting and sharing stories from individuals who have an unlikely, background, right? I myself thought when I was 27 and I was leaving the South to move to California, I need to get into sales so someone takes me seriously by the time I was 30. That's really what I thought. And so looking at this background that you had, I was like, this is a really interesting story to tell. A pilot now turned salesperson, but I can see when you're in that inventory space and the timing, it all kind of correlates to what you'd assume. A pilot has massive responsibility for understanding all of the widgets and the gadgets and the inventory of fuel and timing and all of that. So how did you get that first company to say, hey, this is totally how we would bring someone on board with this background? What do you think it was at the time?
Well, I had bartended through college and waited tables through college, and what I said is, look, I've got people skills. I have the soft skills. And then when you go to the commercial flying world, aviation world, now there's this task management, crew management. How can you balance your priorities? I likened it to risk management in aviation, because there's a lot of crossover there and how we analyze data analysis in the aviation field. How are you tracking your spare parts for your aircraft? Those are things that are dealt with day in and day out. So if I can understand complex systems, if I can understand how to manage my own tasks and priorities, and if I can take these transferable soft skills that I've developed over the years, then making some phone calls, sending some emails, and connecting with people to solve a problem, that sounds like a one-to-one to me. You have to add up a bunch of these tiny non-integer parts to add to the one, but it's a one-to-one. And they saw that and they took a chance on me. And so I started out as a BDR. They didn't just bring me in as a senior AE, of course, but that's where I learned and started cutting my teeth as a BDR.
And I'm sure that anxiety of not having people's lives in your hands or at stake every single day was a welcome change.
So mostly what I had been flying down in Tampa was cargo. And that was fine by me, because yes, there's a couple books that I really liked. One was called Human Factors, I believe by Sidney Dekker, and the other one is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And those are two books that I read through moving up into the airlines. And The Power of Habit talks very explicitly about these human variables that we can control. And so the mantra that I kind of took was, I can control what I can control. Those are the variables that I have power over. I can influence the things that I can influence. And then there's this third chunk that I just have to accept everything else, right? So I can control some things, I can influence other things, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's outside of your power. And so, in aviation, I can control my own skill set. I can talk to ATC and maybe shorten a route or change an approach. But if a gear decides to just shear off, or if hydraulic fluid decides to just fail and spray everywhere, or if you lose an engine, which has happened to me, those are things that you got to do the best with it. Compare that to sales, and now it's, all right, I can control my outreach. I can control my tone. I can control my intentionality. I can influence champions, work with them. And then I got to accept all the other variables that are outside of that. So the stakes are a little lower, but it's equally enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. So we talk on this podcast about the sales edge, and I think you've alluded to it a little bit, where I ask individuals who are on here, guests, what is your sales edge? I'm a firm believer that all of us have that kind of thing. Maybe we've arrived at some point in our career, like, hey, I'm really good at it, or this is a philosophy I stand by, or this is kind of my thing or my spin. What is that for you?
Yeah, I like to steal methodologies from everybody and make them my own. And I think that's something a lot of people do, but I'm open about it. I think when you are able to take what other people do well and learn from their mistakes early on, that's really great. There's the classic saying that only a fool learns from his own mistakes, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Well, coming from this non-traditional background where, yes, that's an asset on its own, coming from a world that I haven't built bad habits, but now I'm able to learn from much smarter people, co-opt their strategies, take what works, and apply that day in and day out. So it's kind of a cop-out in a way, but taking strategies from spin selling or Todd Capone's The Transparency Sale, or there's that guy Keenan.
Yeah,
There's a
right.
gap selling book or something like that. But taking what works for these people who have done this for 30, 40 years, finding what works and applying it on the first go round has been really helpful for me. So it's kind of a cop-out answer.
No,
I get it.
not at all. I think it's very much in line with, we were talking prior to this about being in that, the research triangle area, right? Where there's these schools that are competing like heavily when it comes to athletics. And I think we've seen time and time again, especially as technology increases, this is really what everybody is doing, especially for athletes. So it's not one way, right? You have a different coach for strength and conditioning and your PT. It's taking all of this knowledge and how do you learn from other people and then kind of put your own twist
spin on it. Yeah.
I talked with someone last week who gave some great advice of he encourages his employees, his sales team, to have a board of directors. So look outside of the organization. Who are you going to for prospecting help? Who are you probably women have this like more than men, right? We're like, well, we go to my hair lady and then I go over here. I mean, they're all people who are sharing.
I go across the street to my barber and he will ask me all kinds of questions. Yeah. I ask him about his life that I will be open about it. I'm happy to say I don't know. And I don't know what I don't know as well. So I'm happy to be curious and learn from other people around me. I'm not a Duke fan. I'm not a UNC fan. I am a Kentucky Wildcat fan. So I won't use Coach K as the analogy, but like what Calipari's doing in Kentucky, you're right. These coaches that all initially had, this is the way, this is our structure, this is our, now you see, wait a second, your system looks a lot like his system and you might be bitter rivals, and that's the way I want to view it. Is there is no, I'm not dogmatic. There is no perfect way. There is no perfect methodology, but there are a lot of great methodologies and I can start borrowing from each of those. So if one day I write a book, it'll be a hodgepodge. My list of references will be half the book, I think.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. We all do this naturally in life and you take little bits. I think, top performers, people who are constantly challenging themselves and reading and consuming information because you want to hone and perfect your craft, but also yourself as a person. So it sounds like that has really allowed you to embrace this world of technology, even when it's, not very sexy, right? But it's necessary, right? This is all the back end.
Yeah.
It's all the back end stuff nobody thinks about, but it's not little robots that are doing it all, right? People are managing these processes and looking for ways to make improvements.
Exactly.
That said, coming up through sales, I know you said at one point you were tapped to be a player coach, right? You still carried quota. You were now managing a team. Often we just get thrown in there like, here you go. You're a sales leader. And you're like, I have arrived. And then you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? You're learning from others. A lot of times we're given maybe advice. Maybe we bust a myth. My mom probably still to this day would tell me that we just did this the other day. She's like, you need to call your sister. You need to ask her. And I'm like, Mom, I can just text her. Like I have to constantly remind my mother. Like
there's a quicker way.
I don't have to call anybody and wait for them to call me back. But she's just like convinced, like, you're not going to get an answer unless you call. And we're given that in sales too. Like, this is the way, this is the method. If you do this, this is going to happen. And there were a lot of movies out there that said like that hardcore pull pen style of sales is the only way. So if you had to say, hey, I saw a myth or I want to bust one or I want to put one out there, what would that be?
I think I want to get super philosophical for a second. Okay. So I even in my own life, you'll wind up hearing me wax philosophically on occasion. But I think getting to the core of sales, there is this misconception that sales is dirty or sales is slimy. I think we all have that picture of like Danny DeVito as the car salesman in Matilda. Hey, let me steal your money. And I think honestly, growing up in a sales family, I just thought sales was boring. But it wasn't until I started becoming a young adult, an adult myself, that I was like, oh yeah, sales is slimy. No, it's not. I think I had a little bit of shame in saying I was in
Mm.
sales. Like you see it all the time. Sellers will try and like hide behind these fancy titles that we've given ourselves to make ourselves sound like it's not sales. And I think really the switch flipped for me after. And so I grew up in a family that it was, you read the Bible and then you read How to Win Friends and Influence People. Those were the two books. And the modern version of How to Win Friends and Influence People is probably Todd Capone's Transparency Sale. And he talks very openly about, if you are building trust, it comes from openness and transparency and honesty. And there's no shame in that. At the end of the day, if I'm solving a problem, then I'm doing you a service and helping you. And that is something that should be admirable, and it should be done with integrity, right? A lot of people do make sales slimy in the same way that a lot of people would make financial reporting slimy, or in the same way that there are slimy doctors and nurses, or there are bad lawyers, there are bad pilots. I've seen a lot. So, I think every profession is what you make of it and who you are, your integrity, who you are when nobody's watching. And fundamentally, sales is like any other profession. It should be around connecting with individuals, solving problems, and doing so ethically. So I think that's my biggest myth that I want to bust. I was one of those people who would try and say, "Oh, I don't want to sell you anything."
Yeah.
I had to switch that real quick because, yeah, I am, but I have no shame in it anymore. So I think that's my big one.
I love that. And unfortunately, we're seeing more of a stigma around the sales profession as technology and AI and automation increases.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing it. I actually spent about 30 minutes today, like giving some recommendations to people who had reached out to me, right, with their sales pitch, and me telling them, why this is horrible, why anybody who does any digging is going to realize they're not preaching what they're putting out, right? And I think we are fighting this uphill battle of when we are putting things out at mass quantity because we're trying to make a number, and we know the more touches we have with someone, right, the more opportunities. We take away this personalization. We are discrediting salespeople who are out there every day grinding and hustling and doing it in an authentic manner. So thank you for that. It is rampant, and I think we're going to see a huge shift because it's given a bad name to companies who.
And there are still organizations out there that are doing it the right way, and they've always done it the right way. I don't know how many shout outs I'm allowed to give, but the folks over at Lavender are probably industry leaders in personalization and doing things with integrity. But, I think I see this as a trend that more and more companies are seeing that, and that it doesn't work to just be like Wendy's on Twitter and edgy and pretend to be a brand. It comes down to each individual as a part of your organization, how they present themselves and how they interact. So I see it changing.
Oftentimes that comes from training and modeling and finding people within the organization that are doing that well. And if you don't have that within your organization, like take a hard look and time to clean some house, because what we're putting out there, it's really tainting salespeople. And unfortunately, we still have to bust this myth that all salespeople aren't slimy. It starts with all the time.
It starts with you and me.
I'm not in sales,
here.
Right? Like I never thought I was a salesperson, and like I'm having a conversation, I'm solving a problem, I'm looking for a problem, I'm information sharing. But when we come from a place of desperation, it's usually very stinky for everyone.
Yes.
Well, I've really enjoyed having you on here. I try to keep these short and sweet, under 20 minutes. We're right there so that individuals can learn from you, but also some of those book recommendations, which we'll shout out in the show notes as well. I'm really excited for air date because I think you will have made a transition, and I look forward to keeping up with you and seeing more of your content on LinkedIn and your funny sarcasm, but obviously a very intelligent person who
well, thank you. Thank you.
Knows not only, I mean, if I was going to be in a place and the pilot had a heart attack and you were on my plane, like I'd want you to fly that plane. So
Yes.
it's
I
good you
think
have
that's
those
every
skills.
man's dream, is to hear, like, I mean, you don't want harm on
Right.
anybody
No,
else,
no,
right?
no.
But every man's deep down goes, I can land this plane. I
Yeah.
can do it.
I
And
mean,
then
movies are made of it. So
it would be it would be a horrifying nightmare, but a dream nonetheless, right?
you're like, I've got this. No, truly, I can fly a plane. Yeah.
There's a whole.
You keep up your license then?
I do.
Okay.
It's more of a hobby now.
Yeah.
It's been nice. Sometimes we'll fly out to the Outer Banks, but I did have one VP at one point say, we could probably expense this. And then I showed him the average gas prices versus just a one-way flight on Delta. And that was nixed pretty quick. So, and then the other thing you can check out every Wednesday, I've decided that LinkedIn we need a little upbeat positivity. So I've started sharing hump day recommendations with movies and books and music.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not just a pilot. Awesome. I'm also a big nerd.
So this is gonna come out on a Wednesday. So most likely you will have shared something.
I'll have
Wednesdays.
A podcast recommendation to share now.
I know, this has been awesome. You're also a podcaster by hobby as well. So like multi-talented here.
I am the really boring Ryan Gosling of the world, or Justin Timberlake. Like I kind of fly on the side. I have a side podcast with 3 buddies that I've known for a decade, and then I
but
hop
no
on here.
Spirit line yet. You need an alcoholic beverage backing. You need to get that to like really solidify your stature, or a car commercial, one of those two. You take your pick.
It's time. I'm going to start calling Carvana and White Claw, and whoever answers first, that'll be our sponsor.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. I will end this here. Thank you so much, Alex.
It's been great. Thanks, Celeste.